Thank you very much, Martin and Patrik, for inviting me to come and speak to you all here today. It's a great pleasure. Firstly, English language. I very much appreciate that you are all listening to not your native tongue, so thank you for that. Unfortunately, I can't speak Swedish, so I thank you for bearing with me on that issue. If there's something that is not understood, I'm happy to be stopped and say something again more slowly if that helps. So I'm a podcaster from England and have a show called Living Outside the Matrix. I have been thinking and questioning things for 10 years or so, 15 years maybe. And relevant to the subject of this talk, reason and logic, I have to say that for 50 years of my life, I was a mystic. I was raised as a Roman Catholic and steeped in the tradition of Christianity. So both my schools, my junior school, my secondary schooling. So that was my come from. And then when I began work, I worked as a pilot, and necessarily, quite obviously, the pilots have to be very logic and reason orientated. It's all about the facts of reality when you're loading an aeroplane with fuel and planning a flight between 2 points. So my work life was, very logical, and yet in my personal life, I entertained many ideas that were mystical. For a while, I was very persuaded by the idea that we create our own reality. So the idea that our thoughts actually manifest things in our lives. So I had this sort of two mental operating systems running at the same time, if you like. One very logical and one very mystical. And in 2016, not very long ago, I discovered the work of Ayn Rand, a very, not so famous thinker, but an incredible thinker, I believe, in America. A Jewess who came from Russia over to America, and her thinking had a huge impact on me. It was like a breath of fresh air, and it was logical. So she created her own philosophy. It's called objectivism, and this very much informs what you're going to hear today. I just wanted to give you this background. So the concept of reason is actually the foundation of Rand's philosophy. And maybe after you've heard some of the ideas that I'll share with you here today, you might be interested, if you wanted to look further into logic and reason, her philosophy might be somewhere that you might want to look. So that's my come from. So the first thing I want to say about logic and reason is that there's a lot of nonsense talked about it. So if you just Google what is reason, what is logic, if you go on YouTube, as we do when we want to find out about something, you get all sorts of conflicting ideas and nonsense. If you watched 15 different videos on it, or on logic or reason, there's this. It's similar to climatology, or looking into the climate issue, or looking into health. There's all sorts of confusion. So hopefully my aim today is to bring some simplicity and some clarity to this concept, reason, and also its derivative of logic. Reason is an enormously wide abstraction. It's a big idea. So again, hopefully, if I do my job correctly, I will be able to give you some sort of clear illustration, and maybe you go home with a better understanding of reason and logic than you arrived with. That's the goal. Oops, that's not a good start. Let's see. I have a blank second slide. Let's just bear with me 1 second. I think that's just there we go. Okay, so first of all, of course, what is reason? And we may have an idea of that already, but reason is essentially a faculty. It's an ability of our consciousness, and our day-to-day experience of it is in common sense and so forth. So reason gives us the ability to, as we look out into the world in our experience, observe similarities, differences, patterns, sameness. In essence, to recognize identity. That's what our faculty of reason enables us to do. Faculty, I'm not sure of an equivalent word to use. An ability, I think, is the closest. Yeah. Another faculty of our consciousness is emotions. So that's a different, yeah. So it's the ability to recognize identity. And it rests on something called the law of identity. This is a philosophical term. And it basically means that things are what they are. The glass is the glass, the podium is the podium, the table is the table, the chair is the chair. And these things are obvious, yeah? We don't have any confusion or doubt about what's the table, what's this. It's on the level of self-evident. A is how we can express this idea, where A stands for anything. So the important upshot of this faculty of reason, which enables us to identify things and patterns, is that it's the root of a very important aspect of our human consciousness, and that is the ability to conceptualize. Okay? And it rests on something called the ability to abstract. So before you all glaze over, to abstract means to take out. So it's the ability to observe several different things and to take out something they have in common and consider that separately from the things themselves. So, for example, if we imagined a room full of different tables, for example, all different colours, sizes, heights, different numbers of legs, we can all grasp that we could look at these different items. Of course, we've already learned all our concepts and we're already quite advanced consciousness, but I'm sure you can get the point that we can see a common flat surface supported by legs, something that we put things on. So we can take out, abstract this common feature that tables have. So that is abstraction. It's seeing a commonality. So this ability to abstract enables us to form concepts. And this is where we're coming to the key feature of our human consciousness, is that we can conceptualize. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be able to conceptualize? It means that we can hugely expand our awareness beyond the range of the moment. So here we are in this room, and we're aware of each other, of the lighting, of the screen, but we're not necessarily aware of some political stuff, or we're not necessarily aware of electricity and stuff like that. We can see its effects. So our ability to conceptualize, to think with concepts, expands our awareness outside of this room, outside of this moment. We can think about what we're going to do next after this presentation. That's in the future. That's a concept. You can't see the future. It doesn't exist anywhere. It's an idea. So this ability, this reason, this ability to observe identity, differences, similarities, gives us the ability to conceptualize, which hugely expands our potential knowledge. So let's consider for a moment the difference between us and cats and dogs and pigs and other animals, even apes and higher animals. We have a vastly increased ability to gain knowledge beyond our immediate environment and beyond the range of the moment. And this is really the essential thing that distinguishes being human from being any other kind of living organism. As I'm sure you're aware, any living organism that possesses consciousness, whether it's a spider, a fish, a bird, their consciousness is their means of guidance. And our human form of consciousness, with this ability to conceptualize, is our basic form of guidance. We share the ability to look around us and see the immediate environment. There's the food, I'll eat that. There's my bed, I'm going to go to sleep. We share that with the animals, but we also have this ability, using our concepts and our faculty of reason, our ability to conceptualize, we have the ability to, as I said, hugely expand and think about things next week, next year, in another country, global politics, etc., etc. These are all conceptual ideas. Freedom. You can't point to it, you can't see anything. It's a concept. So that's the first main point, really, about what is reason. And the last thing to say, well, not the last thing to say, but certainly on this slide, is that reason gives us the ability to be able to think logically. It's reason and logic. As I mentioned, reason is the big idea, and logic is a derivative, because our faculty of reason gives us the ability to recognize contradictions. So, going back to identity, this identity, not that identity, this is a derivative of our faculty of reason. We can differentiate between objects in our immediate environment and recognize difference, sameness, etc., etc. So logic comes from reason. Reason is the fundamental. That's the first thing, that faculty or ability. And from that comes our ability to spot contradictions. For example, you can't be hot and cold at the same time. This glass of water can't be a glass of water and not a glass of water at the same time. So we'll expand on this idea. So the point here is that reason is our distinguishing feature as human beings. It's the thing that defines us. So reason was first identified in our recorded history about 2,600 years ago. I forget the philosopher who did, but about 200 years later, Aristotle defined humans as the rational animal in recognition of this distinguishing feature. And because of the reasons that I've described, because reason is so fundamental to our form of consciousness, as I hope to show you, reason is actually our means of living. It's our means of survival, no less. Ta-da! It's that important. It's not something that we can just say, oh, let's just not worry about reason. That is not a good idea. So, what is logic? We've already mentioned that it comes from our ability to recognize identity, to grasp identity. And in a nutshell, reason is the ability to understand and grasp a contradiction. And this concept, this idea of contradictions, is the main method of thinking. You know, we all think and reason all the time. Obviously, we've been doing it for decades. So I'm inviting you to sort of think about your thinking, if you like. But in the process that is thinking, the method is logic. That is the method of thinking. And the faculty that makes it all possible is reason. Reason at the base, the method is logic, and the process is thinking, problem solving, or reasoning, you could say as well. So another important point is that as well as being the method, logic is also the standard of reasoning. It's the standard of thinking. In the classic syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, the standard that declares that syllogism as valid is the fact that it is logical. If we were to say all men are mortal, Socrates isn't, that would be a contradiction. If we say that, sorry, all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, but he's not immortal, then we've arrived at a contradiction. We've said all men are mortal, but here's one that isn't. So that's a contradiction. And this stems from our faculty of reason, and it is the standard by which we make sure that all our reasoning is good, is valid, I think is the word. So logic is quite obvious in the self-evident. It's at the level of the immediately observable around us. It's quite obvious. If you were going to make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, you know, you wouldn't pour the hot water and the ingredients on the table, you'd pour them into the mug. You know, that's an example of the obviousness of logic on the self-evident level. But as soon as you get into more abstract ideas and concepts, when we're talking about politics and freedom and truth, then the logical connections between statements, between ideas, gets increasingly difficult to see. When you're considering basic lower concepts like chairs and tables and things, and the fact that you could spot the similarity that chairs, tables, wardrobes, beds, we can integrate those concepts and come up with a higher concept, furniture. So furniture is not something you can directly say, there's furniture, but it's a conceptual idea that contains all of the other ideas that are individual concepts of things. Hopefully I'm not going too fast here. So logic is the standard of reasoning. That's the point. And this is why it's very important, because in all our efforts of truth-seeking and trying to understand what's going on in the world, there's a lot of thinking to do. There's a lot of thinking with abstract ideas. And we have to be careful with our thinking to see that the connections between them, if somebody tells us this idea and somebody else tells us that idea, and we're joining these two ideas together, we have to make sure we do that logically. And there are many ways that we can fail to do that, and they're called logical fallacies, as I'm sure you've heard of. So definitions. It's really important in all our truth-seeking and understanding the world to be clear on our definitions. It can't be overstated. Language, the ability of language to communicate ideas really depends on definitions, knowing what that idea means, having a clear meaning in our heads. So definitions. I've used the Wikipedia definition of reason because Wikipedia, as you probably know, is a great way of just tapping into the mainstream general view of something. It's a very useful resource for that. And Wiki says that reason is the capacity of applying logic by drawing conclusions from new or existing information with the aim of seeking truth. It then goes on with, this isn't really definition, but say it's associated with philosophy, religion, science, yada, yada, yada. It's a little bit of waffle, really. It's not really part of the definition. And it concludes with generally being considered as the distinguishing feature possessed by human beings, as Aristotle pointed out. So here's Ayn Rand's definition, which I think is much more helpful. It sort of distills a lot of things away. She says that reason is the faculty or ability that identifies and integrates the material provided by our senses. This is a very fundamental definition, but a key part of this definition is identifies. Obviously, we can identify A as A, the table is the table, the chair is the chair. We can identify contradictions, and it integrates. Integrates is joining things together, building that model aeroplane kit out of all the parts, building a worldview out of that idea, and all of these other ideas that what do you call them? Coordinates, these mental coordinates, seeing the bigger picture, in integrating all of the ideas into one bigger picture. So I find Rand's definition useful because it brings in these two key concepts of identifying and integrating. When she says provided by the senses, she's talking about we arrive at the concept of a table, for example, not just by seeing it as a table, although that is the means we use when we understand the concept. But if you consider a baby or a young child just forming the concept, we actually use all of our sensory apparatus in forming concepts. The first time you come across a table, you touch it, feel it, lights and so forth. It's an integration of all our senses. So logic, the Wikipedia definition of logic is generally the study of correct reasoning. But unfortunately that doesn't tell us what correct reasoning is. But again, Rand helps out here with a beautifully concise definition. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. Right, so those are the definitions. So let's talk a little bit more about human consciousness, because this is really the root of why reason is so important, and our means of acquiring knowledge, our means of discerning truth, our means of knowing what the hell's going on in the world and who's trying to fool us and who isn't, etc., etc. So as I mentioned, consciousness is our means of guidance, and a key feature of our human kind of consciousness is that we have perceptual awareness and conceptual awareness. I already touched on this very briefly. Perceptual being seeing what's going on around you. We share that with the animals. Conceptual, thinking in terms of concepts, thinking about next week, next year, last century. That's the conceptual awareness. So perceptual is based on the self-evident, and conceptual awareness is beyond the range of the moment, and that's based using concepts. So you could say that all human knowledge, all of your human knowledge, falls into two important categories. The self-evident, your daily experience of life, getting up in the morning, making a cup of coffee, going to the bathroom, going to work, going to the bank. Your knowledge of your immediate surroundings, that's your base of all of your knowledge. But then your conceptual awareness builds on top of that. So reason enables us to effectively classify everything in our existence, in our experience, by using the method of conceptualization. So when we talk of a table or a chair, you can use the concept table to denote every table that ever existed in the past, all the tables that exist anywhere in the universe now, and any table that will be constructed in the future. So that's a vast expansion. We can used to use one concept, table, and you've suddenly got you've classified an enormous number of individual concrete things with just that one concept. And again, this is a result of reason. Pigs, goats, chickens, and birds can't do that. But the key feature, another key feature, I should say, of our human consciousness is that we don't have the automatic knowledge that those animals do have. So birds, pigs, chickens, and geese, they're all endowed with instinct or somehow, we don't know how it works, they have automatic knowledge. They seem to know what food to eat, generally speaking. They seem to know how to make nests and care for their young. But we don't have that. Humans, again, a phrase pointed out by Aristotle, are born tabula rasa, meaning blank wax tablet, essentially no knowledge at birth. So mystics would debate that point. But anyway, that's our starting point, and it's generally recognized. We go to school to learn, we take courses to find stuff out. We generally all accept that we don't have knowledge. We increase it as we live. But yeah. So we don't have, we're not born with knowledge, but we have the potential means of acquiring it. So another key feature of our human consciousness is that it's fallible. As I'm sure we all know, we can make mistakes, and we need a means to validate all of the ideas that we hear. And as mentioned, the base is the self-evident, and then we build a structure of our knowledge, a necessarily hierarchical structure of concepts, chairs and tables at the bottom, freedom, love, marriage, very, very complex higher concepts as we build on our knowledge. So another key feature is that our consciousness is volitional. Again, think of this compared to animals. They have their automatic knowledge. There's nothing for them to do. They just seem to know what to eat. For us, it's very different, of course. We have to choose to think. So although we can see what's around us and we can obviously operate to some extent on the self-evident level, because of our conceptual faculty, and think of things like health. How do you be healthy? It's not at all self-evident. There's nothing you can look at to determine how to live a life that's going to result in no chronic disease, live to a ripe old age in good health. It's not at all self-evident, so it requires a choice to think, to discover that conceptual knowledge. So it's very, very important to note that our human consciousness is conceptual, it has no automatic knowledge, and it has to be operated by choice. It's volitional. And because it's volitional, because you have to choose to learn things, it's obviously that fallibility is a consequence of its volition, the fact that you have to choose to do it. Animals don't have to do that, so they can't generally get it wrong. A bird can't make a mistake in building its nest or sitting on its eggs. It just does it. So the upshot of all of this is that reason is really at the bottom of how our human consciousness works. It really is the bottom, most fundamental thing that enables our means of gathering knowledge and therefore our means of functioning in the world. So you can say it's our means of survival, but it's probably more properly considered our means of living. So, excuse me a second. So what does it mean? What does reason look like? If we're adhering or following reason as our fundamental guidance, what does that look like? What does it look like to live by reason? And in essence, of course, it's being rational. It means not contradicting ourselves. It means not contradicting ourselves in our thinking or in any of our subsequent behavior. And it's basically rooted in the recognition of things are what they are. A is A. That obvious basic thing it's so obvious that it seems unnecessary to even talk about it. It seems crazy. Well, what do you mean the table's the table? It's so obvious. But that is the very obvious fundamental of being rational. If you took that, recognizing that things are what they are, and if you built on that logically, you can't go wrong. But you can go wrong, as we shall see. So to accept that things are what they are, an implication of that is to also accept that things, what we see around us, are independent of our consciousness. This is really, really important point. If we grasp that things are what they are, the chair cannot be a chair and not a chair, the chair's the chair and the table's the table, and we can see the difference, an implication of that is that things exist and they are what they are, independent as to how we might feel about it, what we think about it, what we'd like to see. It's independent of us knowing about it, of us believing in it. So it's quite an important distinction to get, particularly because today it's a very, very popular idea to believe various forms of consciousness creates reality. And bear with me if you do happen to share that thought. I did for 50 years. But bear with me and hopefully I'll give you some pause to think by the time we finished. So what else does it mean to be rational, to live by reason? It means to be very proactive in the use of your consciousness. Because we don't have automatic knowledge, we have to go out there and find it. It's rational, it's pro-life, it's pro-your life, to go out and say, hey, I want to find out, I want to know, I want to educate myself. That's in your own interest. It's pro-life. It's rational. And in the process of acquiring knowledge, our rationality is expressed in looking for reasons that support it. If somebody just tells me there's a climate emergency and so does everybody else and it's on the news, that isn't a reason. That's an assertion. It's a statement. It's bollocks. It's not supported by reasons. So it's rational. It's an expression of our rationality, if we are being rational, to say, I want to know the reasons. Why? And simply the question, why, is your number one tool. Why? And then you look for the reasons that support any given idea. This is what it means to be rational. A rational person won't go, oh yes, there's a climate emergency. I heard it on the news, so everybody's saying it. It must be true. That is irrational. It's accepting an idea with nothing to support it, no reasons. And in that particular example, you could cite that it's been much warmer in the past, there's been much more CO2 in the past. yada, 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 and you can see that there are no reasons to support that particular idea. So being rational is to be proactive and to look for reasons. And when we say reasons, we mean other ideas that serve as these sort of pillars of support that hold an idea up, if you like, in the structure of your knowledge. Another important component of being rational is choosing rational values. And if we rewind for a minute, if we were to assume, and I'm sure you'll all be with me on this, I want to live the best life I can. I want to not die too soon. I'd like to live a long time. And I'd like my life to be as good as it can possibly be. I'm sure we'd all agree with that, wouldn't we? That is a basic starting point for how do you want your life to go. So if we're thinking rationally, we're adhering to logic. So we would want all of our thinking and our choices to proceed non-contradictorily along those lines, okay? I want my life to be good. I've already stated my aim, my goal. So to be logical in method, and therefore to be rational, is to do everything that does not contradict that goal. So if I want to live a long time, I want to be healthy, I mustn't eat junk food. I mustn't smoke cigarettes. They would be exhibiting contradictions in my behavior, assuming that I want to live a long time, yada, yada, yada. So this is what it means to be rational, is to not exhibit contradictions, to act consistently. And this is why when I say choose rational values, we're calling them rational values because they don't contradict. That's a key distinction. Rational values, making, if health is important to you, exercise, being productive. Obviously, human beings have to create things. We're not like the birds and the animals. We can't just eat what we find. We have to produce values. We have to create homes and clothes and computers and cars. So these are all aspects of rationality. And it's worth noting that in terms of our thinking, a key feature of thinking rationally, to be rational, means that you are objective in your thinking. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to be objective? It means to, I like to think of a sort of metaphor of sort of elevating in a helicopter above myself and looking down and thinking, seeing the way I'm interacting from a point of view outside of myself as well as through my own eyes. Because if we're thinking subjectively, it's all through your eyes, through your experience. And when we're talking with somebody else and we're being rational, we are demonstrating this ability to be objective and to see things as they are, not as we'd like them. Again, it comes down to that distinction of recognizing that A is A. Things are what they are. We're not projecting our desires on anything. We're looking at them as they are. And thinking objectively is a sort of a self-monitoring exercise where I imagine going above myself in a helicopter, looking down, is he thinking objectively? Is he regarding stuff as somebody else would? If I place myself like somebody else in the conversation, is what he's saying recognizing that things are independent of him? I hope that makes some kind of sense. So it's to be objective in one's thinking is a really key component of being rational. There are many more, and I'm going to have to hurry up a little bit, I suppose, because there's a lot of slides here. But being rational is, like I said, it's a big idea. It contains lots of concretizations, lots of examples of being rational. So one of them here at the bottom of this slide is welcoming challenges. So if I think I know something, if I think I know that saturated fats are bad for you, it's rational to always welcome somebody else saying, hey Nige, you might not be right on that because I've got some information that contradicts that. And when you see a contradiction, that should be a red flag. Investigate further. So the point here is that it's rational to be open to being told that you're wrong. Now that's a big ask for a lot of people. We don't like to be wrong. There's a lot of psychology attached to being wrong, and yet it's massively in your own interest. Remember, you want knowledge. You want to know what's true. You don't want to be stuck with a wrong idea in your head. And if somebody is saying to you, hey, I've got some contradictory information, or might just simply saying, you're wrong, the rational man goes, am I? Please show me. Please show me where you think I'm wrong. Not very popular, that one, but it is an example of being rational. Let's just stick on that one a second. As I said, there are lots of examples of being rational. We could talk all day about that, but I won't. We'll move on. But it's also rational to know when to stop being rational. It's also rational to know when to not be logical. Do you know what I mean? There are some aspects of our lives when it's inappropriate to choose certain questioning, self-educating behavior, which generally speaking is thumbs up, it's very good, but if we're looking at rationality more broadly, it's choosing appropriate behavior. Yeah. So it isn't always appropriate to be problem solving. It's a very life-supporting habit to have, and I thoroughly encourage it. But sometimes I think we truth seekers, and I maybe fell into this at one point, is that you get your problem solving all the time. So part of rationality is to choose when not to be rational. It kind of sounds counterintuitive. So what are the consequences of rationality? Quite obviously, I'm sure that you all know, it's success. It's the acquisition of knowledge, knowing what to do, succeeding at repairing your car or building a bridge or any endeavor. If you've approached it rationally, if you've gathered all the information, success is the inevitable result. And if the practice of being rationality were so universal, if all of us human beings were rational, human life really can take off, and we could achieve human flourishment. I don't believe we're anywhere near human flourishment at the moment, as you probably don't either, but that's because of the lack of rationality that I see in our culture. So just to look at these, the key consequences of reason, where does it take us? It takes us in all the good directions, the three basic good directions anyway. Certainly, so we're starting from, this is one of them, this slide, based on a respect for objective facts of reality and of man's nature. A is A. This enables rational discussion. We're all being objective. We're all seeing things as they are and not as how we'd like them to be. And this is the basis of negotiation and persuasion. And this leads, of course, to cultural diversity, because we're not forcing anyone to stop doing anything. You can do what you like, and you can do what you like. Let's all allow each other to make our own choices. And this leads to cultural diversity amongst rational people. And it leads to peace, and it leads to freedom. And the bottom line there, that reason and freedom they go together. That's something maybe we can talk about later on, but we'll leave that one in the long grass for now. And so on the one hand, faith and force go together as well, but we'll come back to that one. So one of the main consequences of reason is that it leads to peace. It leads to freedom. Another huge one is that it leads to wealth creation. It leads to material abundance, comfort, washing machines, jet aeroplanes, cars, computers. It leads to all of these things because it's rooted in recognition of the facts of reality and of man's nature, needing values and needing to think and produce and all of these things. We accumulate conceptual knowledge. We grasp that we need to respect property rights. This is quite a fast track pointing towards the wealth creation, but we recognize when we're being rational that it's appropriate to respect everybody else's desires to do other things. We don't coerce. We don't force anybody to do anything. This is another key aspect of rationality. And this leads to production of things, negotiation in trade, and then of course trade and exchange of goods, ideally in a free market, leads to wealth creation. And this was seen in the post-Renaissance period with the birth of the United States of America, the first country born in reason. There were certain flaws, and that's why it's no longer a free country. But during its heyday, and the immense freedom there was economically, huge explosion in wealth and in consequent standard of living, and Europe was fairly rational as well. So was the UK, and of course we have the Industrial Revolution and this explosion of wealth creation and the achievement of what we all take for granted today, basically. So that's another major consequence of reason, is material abundance. That's the point. And lastly, in terms of these consequences of reason, is I want to advocate that it leads to happiness. It leads to peace and freedom and cultural diversity. It leads to material well-being, but it also leads to what we can call spiritual well-being, well-being of consciousness, thriving, flourishing, being happy. And it's a similar sort of track. We respect the facts of reality. We respect the facts of our human nature. And these are all almost conversations in themselves. These are all big ideas. I realize we're covering a lot of ground here. And the acquisition of knowledge, of course, isn't all about gaining knowledge of the external world. It's about looking inside and gaining knowledge of self. What's it like to be a human being? And we can empathize with other people from our introspection. There's an enormous amount of knowledge to be gained from introspecting as well as extrospecting. So it's two sides of the same coin, but it's an important component towards happiness, personal development, the idea of improving oneself. It's looking inwards, evaluating oneself and trying to better oneself. I mentioned the idea of identifying rational values. Rational morality, this is maybe a big idea that I don't want to go too deeply into, but if we're being rational, if we're adhering to reason, if we're guided by reason, we will be honest, we will identify the values we want to do, we will seek logically to be productive and achieve them. And this is how we can achieve our happiness, by realizing our goals, by achieving our values. So the consequence of that is happiness. I like to think of happiness as the emotional reward for getting it right, for living correctly, respecting other people, working hard, rationality, knowing when not to be logical, all of these things. And the result is that if you achieve your happiness, if you achieve your values, the result is happiness. So how are we doing for time? Let's just see. Gosh, time's flying. So I want to briefly introduce you to the idea of the epistemology of reason. Now, epistemology is a big, scary sounding word. You know, whatever language we speak, certainly for English people, it's a scary word. It's just a branch of philosophy, as you may or may not know, that deals with knowledge. It asks the question, what is knowledge and how do we know things? And this is a particular area of interest of mine as a practical philosopher. I'm very interested as a truth seeker in knowing how can we know? What's the method? What are the fundamental principles of arriving at certainty? So we want to build a worldview. I want to know what's going on in my world. I want to plan my life so that my children can have the best lives, so that I can be secure, etc., etc. So I need a means of knowing with a degree of certainty that I'm correct, that I have facts, that I have truth, and therefore genuine knowledge. And this is what I refer to here as the epistemology of reason. Reason is the foundation of a useful worldview that's in touch with reality, that knows the facts. Yeah? And it is possible. It's widely believed these days that you can't possibly know. You know, even the experts are all arguing and disagreeing. How can anyone know anything? It's a very common idea that can get people bewildered and hopeless and throw their hands up and say, do you know what? But you can know what's true if you use what I refer to as the epistemology of reason. And it all comes down to the facts, as I've mentioned earlier, of our particular kind of consciousness. And for those people that like to question this idea that you need to be rational, you need an epistemology of reason, the obvious example is if you're crossing a busy highway intersection, you know, would you sort of put a blindfold on and say, right, I'm going to listen to my higher self now, and my higher self's going to tell me when to go, I'm going to tune in to the universe, and then I'll walk. It would be absurd, wouldn't it? That would be utterly insane. So we use our faculty, our senses, we look left and right, we're listening, we're integrating all of the data coming from our senses. We're also drawing on our past knowledge, our knowledge of mass, momentum, speed, trajectory, forces, collisions. We've at this stage in our lives, we have a mass of knowledge in our subconscious that we're also drawing on at the same time when we stand on this busy street corner to cross the street, and we're using our rational faculty. We're being rational, and we are using an epistemology of reason when we decide when it's safe to step out across the street. It's quite an obvious example. So lots of people will say, yes, but aren't there other means to knowledge? I certainly used to think that there were, and maybe some of you guys do too. And maybe the obvious ones are things like gut feeling and intuition. And these are very real. I'm not about to rubbish them, don't you worry. Some people go as far as just to say, you could just tune in and just feel it. You can, there's telepathy, thought transference, I don't know. But there are some, I think, quite far out ways. Maybe they're all trying to describe the same thing. So let's call it intuition or gut feeling if you're more comfortable with that idea. And my point here today, or one of them here, is that intuition and gut feeling is a really vital component of your rational way of thinking, your rational search for truth and your epistemology of reason. It is. So let's remind ourselves that all the time our consciousness is bombarded with information. It's, they say in any presentation such as this, if everyone's even paying attention and listening and it's their native language, they may take away 25% of what is heard. So we all know that a lot goes past us. It's very easy to miss things. But our subconscious stores considerably more information than we're consciously aware of. enormous amount more. And we know from subliminal advertising and all of these things, images flashed here and there, bypasses the conscious mind, and it gets into our subconscious. So I didn't mention the subconscious. I forgot to mention that as a key characteristic of our human form of consciousness, but it's that sort of reservoir of all our knowledge. Where's my knowledge of all my stuff back home, my wife and children and my job and all these sorts of things? Where's all that right now? I'm not thinking about it. It's all stored in my subconscious. And hopefully, if we're all focused on the subject of reason and logic, you guys aren't in contact with your knowledge of your various other aspects of your lives. It's in your subconscious. So it's an important component, an important distinction to recognize the subconscious and the fact that it can get a lot of information from the environment that you don't notice consciously. Not generally disputed. This is not a controversial idea. Ideas get past your conscious evaluation. You don't notice them. So intuition, gut feeling, if we view it rationally, just for a moment, whatever your preconceived ideas are, if you're considering some issue or some occurrence, something happening in your life, and if your subconscious mind has noticed something that has escaped your consciousness, it's there, it's in your subconscious. That data got through. And we know because ideas can inform people's motivations, even subconsciously. But this is kind of the root of gut feeling, intuition. It's your subconscious mind attempting to communicate with your conscious mind. As you probably all know, we have a huge vagus nerve and lots of brain cells almost in the gut. The gut is considered the second brain by many people. And this is why the gut feeling is often invoked, or as the source of intuition. I felt that in my gut, some people might say. But the point here is that your subconscious, if there's ideas in your subconscious that are relevant to what you're thinking, you're trying to solve a problem, or there's some process in your mind, and your subconscious has some relevant information. It's sort of trying to shout at you, trying to reach up. Hey, Nige, there's some important thing you need to know here. But of course, your subconscious hasn't got a sort of a buzzer. Oh yeah, coming up from the subconscious. What is it? Oh, okay. We don't have that mechanism. So all we've got is this feeling, this uneasy. God, I'm sure there's something missing there. I'm sure I've forgotten something. This I see is a rational interpretation of the concept of intuition, and it means that we don't have to invent a higher self or a deity or another realm where this information's coming from. Because intuition and these things are real. I mean, I'm sure you've all had an intuition that you acted on and thought, brilliant, I believe in intuition. Spot on, thank goodness. I know I have, and it's a very, very real thing. But there's a tendency for people who don't think rationally. Thinking rationally, working stuff out, of course, takes effort. It's another thing maybe I didn't mention about it. So it's easier to jump for a shortcut. But the point is that mystics like to explain intuition and gut feeling as something sort of, as something mystical, as something coming from God or from some other place that there's no proof for, there's no evidence for. So that's just a brief acknowledgement of the idea of intuition as an adjunct to the epistemology of reason, as an addition to it. So next I'd like to consider what happens when reason is taken away, if we discount reason. If you're trying to establish a worldview, you're trying to figure out what's true, are viruses real or not? If you can't be bothered with reason, if it's too much effort to think things through, ask questions, there's always an apparent shortcut, which is essentially the concept of faith. And it's believing, that shortcut of not needing the reasons. And religions for eons in the past they probably came up with this concept of faith. Religions have traditionally fulfilled a purpose that should properly be filled by philosophy. Philosophy being an integrated set of ideas to guide human life. So in the past, before we had philosophy, relatively new invention, 2,600 years ago in ancient Greece, but before that, religions was a substitute for a consistent set of ideas to guide human living. And of course, a lot of it was sort of plucked from nowhere. There weren't reasons to support the ideas. You couldn't say, well, why is that? Well, you just have to accept it. And, the idea of the deity, we just have to, God says so, don't ask questions. I was raised as a Catholic. I was told that it's a virtue not to question God. You won't understand, so don't even try. Just accept it. And this is the idea of faith. To believe something in faith, to believe something on faith, I should say, is simply to accept it without any ideas. Oh, I don't need any ideas. I'll go along with that. That is faith. And although that idea, that concept comes from religions, it's massively prevalent today. Most people are mystics in a secular sense, you could say. Not to do with religion. Most people during the pandemic were putting on their masks because they believed and accepted the idea that it was going to do something, or they got their shots because they accepted the idea that that was the solution on faith. They just accepted it. Okay, government says so, that's good enough for me. The priest said so, God said so, Anthony Fauci said so. It doesn't really matter the source of the idea, but if we're prepared to not ask that question, why? Why must I do that? What are the reasons that support that idea? What holds it up? And if there are no reasons, if it's just because someone says so, well then the idea falls and it should be rejected. So the whole mystic thing invokes this other place, and that, as I said, comes from religions. And intuition and gut feeling are said to be a source of tapping into this other place, this higher realm, or somewhere else. Where is it? I don't know. No one's ever shown me. As I said, raised a Catholic and taught, yep, there's somewhere else that you go to. But I must admit, I no longer buy into that, as you can tell. So, again, with the absence of reason, we have no means of validation. That's the important thing. And that means that whatever we claim as our knowledge, whatever we consider, oh yes, I know this, I know I must, I know I mustn't eat saturated fat, so, it'll give me a heart attack. If we're holding that idea as true, even though it's false, that amounts to mysticism. There are no reasons that support it, and we can't consider it knowledge. It's essentially a belief. And an important extension of that is that you can't ever achieve any certainty. Without reasons to support the ideas that you hold as true, you can't be certain. So very briefly, let's talk about certainty. Obviously, you can't be 100% certain about anything, and this is where sometimes the waters are muddied and confusion is encouraged. You can't be 100% certain. I can't be 100% certain that I'm going to get home safely on Monday. What if there's a supernova and the sun goes out? I don't know. It's spectacularly unlikely. I don't think that's going to happen, but I acknowledge that it's less than 100% certain that I'll get home. But the point is, with certainty, is that you don't need 100% certainty. You just don't need it. It's a red herring. It's irrelevant. You need to be certain to a level of beyond a reasonable doubt. And just think about the legal system. With all its flaws, the legal system at least has that good idea in there, is that they use their standard of certainty is to beyond a reasonable doubt. If there's no reasonable doubt, then we can take that as our standard of certainty. And this is what it means when we use the epistemology of reason, and we're looking for the reasons that support and hold an idea up. We go, well, okay, that reason, that sounds good, and this one sounds good, yeah, I can go with that. But I still got a problem with that. Let me ask another few questions, and then you might uncover some more knowledge which further supports the particular idea in question. And you eventually get to a point, well, okay, my doubts are satisfied, I've answered all the questions, and that is your practical level of certainty. So yeah, in the absence of reason, I don't know if we want to maybe wind up for a break, Patrick. Will you stop me if you think it's appropriate? But in the absence of reason, guys, the important thing is that really all we've got when we use faith, whether in a religious sense or whether we use it in a secular sense, and we just believe we should get vaccinated or we believe in climate change, all this really amounts to is a feeling that it's true. And that feeling is real. I'm not saying that's not a real thing. If everyone around you in the supermarket is wearing a mask and all your friends and relations are going to get their vaccination shots, you can really feel like you should. Obviously, that isn't a reason to get vaccinated. It isn't a reason to support that it's a good idea. But my point is that any kind of use of faith or accepting an idea without reasons, it all comes down to a feeling. There really isn't much else. We have this other faculty of our consciousness, as I mentioned earlier, of emotion. And we're going to talk about this in a bit. Emotion is another capacity or ability of our consciousness. And it's our ability to feel things, but it doesn't tell us that anything is true. So we don't have reasons, we just feel something is true. And that's, I label this the epistemology of emotion. It's deciding what is true and what is real and building your worldview, really important thing, your understanding of reality and the world around you, building that on emotion. And that really isn't the way to go. So let's just make the point here that the epistemology of reason implicitly rests on a rejection of that idea A is A. Reality is independent of consciousness. If we're just feeling that something is true, it's a form of subjectivism. Subjectivism, essentially, the idea of the world according to me. I'm just looking out through my eyes, and I'm creating a reality as I see it. This is all based on it all comes down to a sense of just feeling it, in the heart, as it were. And it's difficult to see because it's implicit. Maybe we should just explain implicit for clarity here. What is an implicit idea? An implied idea, or one that is implicit, is necessary. It's logically there in the reasoning, in the structure of what the idea sits on, but it's not talked about. So we haven't recognized it, we haven't seen it, but it's part of the it's like the foundations of this building. We all walk in here not conscious of the foundations, or if we were up on a skyscraper at 100 floors up, the other floors up beneath us are implicit. We don't have to talk about them. you kind of get the idea. So an implicit idea is one that's necessarily there in the reasoning process, but we're not conscious of it and we're not discussing it. So when we are just feeling things, we've rejected reason now, we're just going to go with our feelings, we're on the epistemology of faith. And this implicitly rests on a rejection of A is A, that things are what they are, that reality is independent. It's an implicit component. We will try and shed some light on that maybe during the question time, but it's a denial of the independence of reality. So it might be a good idea to pause here, Patrik, because what I'd like to do next, ladies and gentlemen, is to talk a little bit about emotions, because it's so popular for people to feel that something is true. It's been part of the propaganda that we've all grown up with. I don't know if anyone remembers Star Trek, the famous space exploration fantasy from the 1960s. Great show. I used to love that. Captain Kirk, the emotional human being, and his oppo, first officer, Dr. Spock, he was the rational alien. Very powerful message in there. And the idea of political correctness, kowtowing to people's feelings. Oh, don't upset them. Don't call them black. Don't call them disabled anymore. It's too factual. It's too much of a clear identification of the facts. We have to respect that they might be upset. So the whole concept of political correctness, and there's a good side to it. Of course, we don't want to upset people. Naturally, we don't want to. But it's an elevation of people's feelings over and above factual clarity. It's a tipping of the balance. It's a demonstration in our Western culture that emotions are more important than the facts of reality. I advocate that's where we are. Our culture is very emotional. How many films have we all seen where, does the hero go with his heart or with his head? And it's generally very popular to assume go with the heart. And that is essentially saying go with the epistemology of emotion. And so when we come back, we reconvene, we'll talk a little bit about emotions, and they're great. I'm not going to knock emotions at all, but it's important to recognise what they are and their proper use. So I think that's probably a good place to pause.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.